All right. Again, welcome. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Katja Ritterbusch. I'm the president of SPJ Georgia. And please also meet our co-moderator for tonight, Janelle Williams, vice
Welcome.
president
Thank you for
of
being here.
SPJ Georgia. You already met Janelle. And before we kick off our discussion tonight, let me just say a few very quick words about SPJ and SPJ Georgia. For those of you who are or may not be familiar with our organization. SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists, is the oldest organization representing journalists in the US, founded actually in 1909. Our Georgia chapter isn't quite as old, but we're turning 11 this year. SPJ has three main missions. The first one, everything revolving around First Amendment rights, freedom of the press, right to know, right to report. Number two is ethical journalism, the SPJ Code of Ethics. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, is by now standard in many newsrooms across the country. And number three is education for student journalists, early career journalists, veteran journalists, but also education for the public. As you all know, media literacy is critically important right now. So we help journalists, we help educate journalists on how to educate the public. That's how we like to say it, and about what journalists are, what they do, how they do what they do, and why they do what they do. So our topic tonight, AI tools for journalists, pretty much ties into most of these aspects, certainly education, but also ethical journalism. And AI is a big driver of change in our industry. Probably, we discussed that before you all came in, probably the biggest driver the driver for change that many of us will see in our lifetimes or certainly our careers. Often associated with concerns too, like questions like, is AI going to take our jobs away? And our speakers tonight will address these concerns, but they will also talk mostly about benefits of using AI in the newsroom and guardrails that have to be in place. Our speakers are not just experts on the topic, but they're also practitioners. So I'd like to introduce first Karin Assmann. She's an assistant professor at UGA's Grady College of Journalism. She studies news production and looks at how journalists and news organizations respond to change. And as we said, AI is the biggest driver of change right now. She's currently working on a study with a PhD student, I believe, who's also joining us tonight, about the adoption of AI in nonprofit newsrooms. Karin worked as a journalist before she became a journalism educator. She was a foreign correspondent based in Washington, D.C. for the German investigative television format Spiegel TV. And J.D. Capelouto is a reporter covering geopolitics at the digital news site Semaphore. He's also the lead writer for Semaphore's flagship newsletter. And he has helped develop internal newsroom AI tools for Semaphore, and he will talk a little bit about that. JD joins us from New York tonight, but he has deep ties to Georgia. He's an Atlanta native, and he previously worked at the AJC, where he covered local news and politics. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Karin and JD will give brief presentations, and then from there, we'll go right into the Q&A. And we'll start with Karin.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction. First of all, Katja seems to think I'm only going to talk about the benefits, but I will not only talk about the benefits of AI. So
I said mostly.
Yeah, mostly about the benefits. I'm going to share my screen now and hope that I'm going to get the right thing on the screen. Let me know if you see my presentation. Awesome. All right. So I'm here to talk to you about the opportunities and challenges and some of the things that are the research community is talking about. I promise not to bore you with too much research, but I think it's important to kind of understand what some of the issues are that researchers are looking into because they're certainly looking at how AI is being applied and what some of the issues are and concerns are around it as this technology is developing. So I'm going to be talking to you, about technology and journalism overall, but look at the different aspects along the work processes of journalism, look at some of the concerns and talk to you about some of the research initiatives and some of the neglected areas that maybe aren't just important for you as journalists to think about, but also as you use AI, but also to think about maybe as story ideas, because there are some story ideas hidden in AI as it intersects not just with journalism, but also with other industries um, and other organizations and institutions. So, not to bore you with sort of what we all learned probably in journalism school about the impact of technology on journalism, and how journalists do their jobs. I come from television, so I chose some images that show these old beta SP tape players, things that I started with and still remember handling, although that laptop is not one that I used. But that we talked a lot in the last decades about digitization and convergence and what does that look like in the newsroom. And we still talk a little bit about how some newsrooms, especially smaller community newsrooms, community papers, struggle really with these issues around digitization. And the moment that the internet and social media as a distributing platform, as well as a research platform, the moment metrics entered into the conversation, so much changed about how journalists did their jobs, right? So it is always also a question about labor, that very skilled labor turned into this multi-skilled labor. And we are teaching now at UGA students how to do multi-platform reporting because we know that is one of the demands that technology really places on us. Some have argued that all of these technological advances have meant a kind of democratization of journalistic production. That means that anybody can do it. The barriers of entry are low, but you'll also see that some people cannot use the technology the way it should or could be used in order to really get ahead of the game or keep up with the big guys. And it can also mean that some people sort of mimic journalism, and AI may be helping them to do just that. Um, so let me talk a little bit about how AI, according to researchers and some practitioners, is being used in the whole work process or workflow. So obviously it has enhanced the way we search for topics and events. You'll later on, JD will talk a little bit more about how he, as a practitioner, uses these to find stories and to discover data, perhaps that you didn't know existed, to extract data, to program so that you can actually use data that's sort of hiding in a form that's not structured enough, and to use social media and search engines in ways that are new. You can brainstorm story ideas and you can deploy time and data management tools in a much more efficient way. So AI tools in production, of course, allow you to generate text, images, audio, and video. You see here at the top, I put in this little Premiere Pro can actually pretend that you didn't turn the camera off when actually you did turn the camera off, which I think is highly problematic. You can alter images, audio and video images pretty easily with some free tools. Translation and transcription. I mean, translation is built into all of our browsers now, which is incredibly helpful if you want to include news from around the globe. So these are all really positive things. You have apps for fact checking, writing support, and sports news and earnings reports that use structured data have actually been automated and written. The AP has been doing that for years, I think since 2016. So, as we, use more, as we find and employ more sophisticated AI tools, these are really very positive tools that can support the way we produce our journalism. Although I would caution that this visual tool, the tools to enhance and alter visuals, I think is highly problematic, including audio, and we'll talk about the concerns in a minute as well. AI in distributing our journalism has been incredibly helpful. You can target subscribers in a much better way. You can deliver and personalize content in a better way, which has its benefits and its drawbacks, of course. Using audience analytics, finding a better headline and what to use in SEO in order to have your articles more discoverable are incredible assets. And content moderation, which has been very problematic, can, if the platforms that you're using um, are on the same page as you are, really extremely helpful. On the reception side, I think that's something that we as journalists don't think about as much as perhaps we should. Now, all of our, whether you use DuckDuckGo or Google searches, you immediately have already a sort of a summary of the searches that are done for you. So it's kind of dumbing down the search. It's already figuring out what some of the, according to the algorithm, more relevant search topics, search results are. Um, news consumers can use feeds. Google News is already an algorithmic sort of curator of the news feed. So it's kind of taking over a lot of the agency, really, that the recipients of our news stories have. On the right here, I thought it was interesting because I do still go on Facebook because that's a great place to find stories and people. Right away, I find it helpful that you don't have to look through all the comments, but AI will kind of summarize what all the people are kind of complaining about and give you a little summary. That's awesome. But it also really changes the way that I use these platforms, right? So I think we need to think a little bit more about what that actually does with not only our habits as journalists, but with consumers' habits as well. So here briefly, because I'm keeping an eye on the time, are some of the concerns that we have. We are creating filter bubbles, right? Because as consumers, we're sort of self curating our feeds, and technology is doing it for us, and AI is making it even easier. As creators, our content may not be as diverse as it is, right? It's kind of telling us, it's kind of putting us in a certain area. I like to think also, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, about how AI sometimes sort of forces us to do things that we hadn't done before. My Outlook tells me to use an Oxford comma, and I've turned into an Oxford comma person because it keeps correcting my writing. So I really think that subliminally, some of these tools not only are changing the way we write, but also what we write about, because it's kind of between the lines, nudging us in a certain direction. Misinformation and deepfakes are a huge issue because it just opens up so many possibilities. Data bias is sort of same as content diversity, that we're really not so sure what's behind the algorithms that are nudging us in a certain direction. And it really begs the question, like how editorially independent are we, right? How much of this is actually machine curated decision making? And finally, the two last points I think are super important, and that is issues around copyright and labor. And I hope that I've triggered some of you to think about sort of what is journalism? What is the human part of journalism that we contribute, right? That makes us essential, that AI cannot replace. So recently there have been some stories, and I'm almost done. Maybe you saw today that newspapers had printed top, I think, 30 summer reads that were invented, right? So it was AI generated, and several newspapers did not vet that, including, I think, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and a paper in Chicago. Um, but the Columbia Journalism Review, and I highly recommend this, and I'll send this along with the links. They interviewed or asked for 50 to 250 word submissions from journalists across the U.S., asking them how they use AI. And the spectrum ran from "I reject it" to "these are all these great innovative ways in which I do it." So it kind of shows you that the pitfalls of the use of AI are apparent, but that the spectrum of how journalists and newsroom in the U.S. are using these and internationally are using these is also really wide. Um, Finally, the issue around labor and how this changes the way that we do our work. We have unions that have, and I did a study with unions that were completely sort of ignorant of AI and its power and its really transformative power and the need to include something in contracts about what that does to labor. And that was 2 years ago. In the meantime, unions are all over it, trying to figure out how to protect jobs, and how to incorporate AI issues around AI in the contract. And then I see on LinkedIn, Gannett is now looking for AI assisted reporters. So what does that mean? Like, what does that mean also for us educators in terms of what we need to teach our students about how they should be treating and learning about AI and incorporating it into their work? So research really looks at the disruption of journalistic authority. How does it change news, how our news judgment and the idea of news value? How does it change our roles? Who actually implements it and who has sort of the power of it? And then finally, some of the audience issues that I talked about, and consumption patterns that are changed through AI. As Katja mentioned, Moses Okocha and I, who's also here, he's a PhD student and lead author on this study that we're doing, where we're asking folks that work for rural nonprofit newsrooms that have these very, clear mission statements, and how they're using AI. And does that jive with their mission statements, or is there some kind of conflict about that? And we're finding that there's limited use of AI. I'm seeing that also in another study that I'm doing, that people are just overworked and don't have the time and the resources to really learn how to use it properly. And that some actually do see a conflict, with a space between the word see and conflict, between their mission statement and their journalistic values when they go ahead and use AI in their work. Some of the topics that are neglected that researchers have also found is the environmental impact of AI technologies. I mean, around Atlanta, I think there are 7 data centers now. And the kind of energy and power and water that sucks, that is something that seems to be universally neglected because AI is just so convenient. Of course, some of the ethical challenges and regulatory frameworks, and the role of journalism educators like myself in preparing students for this AI-driven future in the profession. And finally, access, right? It is kind of a question of who has the money, who has the resources. Certain newsrooms are going to depend just on these free tools that have, you pay a price for that as well. And the larger, the New York Times is going to have really fancy AI stuff. So again, there's like this disconnect and a way of sort of just unequal distribution of the power of AI in the profession as well. And I have sped talked for 12 minutes. Katja, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Karin. That was great. Please hold your questions for Karin. I do have a couple. I'm pretty sure you do as well, but let's go ahead with JD for his presentation, and then we dive right into the Q&A.
Awesome. That was super interesting, Karin. And thank you, Katja and Janelle, for having me. This is super interesting and important topic. I'll go ahead and share my screen as well. Um, and as Katja mentioned, I'll be talking through a few kind of more like practical ways I use AI in the newsroom on a daily basis, and also walking through kind of the mindset of kind of how I try to approach these things and how you can as well. And I tried to tailor this for a wide range of uses. As Katja mentioned, I'm a reporter and a writer primarily, but I know there's, and for digital and for an email newsletter, but I know there's a wide range of folks on the call here in terms of editors, reporters, different mediums. So I'm hoping that this can kind of apply to everyone, and looking forward to kind of discussing and sharing questions after. So I tried to think of mindful in ways that I perceive as ethical newsroom use cases and tips here. Here's my big disclaimer, which is kind of my thesis for some of this. And a lot of this stems from the same kind of caveats that Karin mentioned. AI, the disinformation thing is huge. You should be skeptical about its use, never solely rely on it. I never really publish anything that was solely written by AI, and you should always follow your newsroom's AI policies. That kind of goes across everything I'm saying here. But I do believe that in limited specific capacities, there's ways that you can use AI to make you more productive, and also it'll teach you ways ways, and I hope this presentation shows ways in which it won't really come close to replacing everything that we do. And if you aren't afraid of AI and you don't shy away from it, and you kind of at least are familiar with what it can do, you also know what it can't do, and what makes what you as a human bring to your newsroom, and then the work that you do. And so everything that I kind of showed today will also have a flip side of, well, here's what it can't do, and here's why it's still important that you. Oh, how do I can't. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the first thing is kind of reminders and tasks. This is through ChatGPT. Here's a screenshot here, essentially how it works. All you do is go to, into the regular ChatGPT that you normally use, and you tell it to create a scheduled task, and it will ask you questions on what you like to do, how it would like you to remind you, and it basically will run a specific prompt at a certain time, at a certain day. So however you want to do it. So one example is if there's news events that you have to check on every day, what executive orders did President Trump sign today? Or what is the lead story for in Georgia today, for example? That's a very broad one, but you can essentially tell it to run that task every morning, and you can check at 9 a.m. and it will be there. Another one, I worked in local news, and I worked with Crystal Dixon at the AJC. We were always keeping track of various appointments and city council votes and positions, and it was sometimes tough to keep track of who held what position at what time, and you kind of maybe wonder, oh, did that position get filled or something like that? So you could have it, for example, see, has the XYZ chief post who holds this position, and every day it'll tell you so and so holds this position. That's just an example, but the scheduled tasks is kind of a way to think about something that it can help you and essentially automate a task that you might have to ordinarily do or that you would forget about. One other way that kind of you should broadly think about AI is kind of as a research assistant, or as an an assistant. And this is funny. I actually took this quote from the Columbia Journalism Review piece that Karin also mentioned of how we're using AI. This is Nick Thompson, the CEO of The Atlantic, and I really liked how he worded this. I use AI the way I would use an insanely fast, remarkably well-read, exceptionally smart research assistant who's also a terrible writer who happens to BS a lot. That's kind of a good way to think about AI usage in the newsroom. Imagine that you have a kind of an assistant, an intern who is really, really, really smart, but may have slept through all their classes. And if you ask it to tell you the history of a very specific court case in a rural Georgia town, it might make up some of those facts and pretends it knows more than it does. But if you were to give this assistant the entire opinion on that case that you found yourself, and you asked it to summarize it or find different things in that very contained, specified context, it can be pretty good about that. So also, if you're looking, if you're researching a story, or you're thinking, working on something that you're not completely well versed on, you can kind of ask on background, for background info from this, from AI, as if it were your research assistant. So one real world example, I remember at the AJC, I was writing a story about a nonprofit in Atlanta, and going really in depth on some of their finances. And I'd never written about nonprofits before. I didn't know about nonprofit law, and I had to go through, I did all these interviews with legal experts about various aspects of nonprofit law. That's something that probably could have been sped up if ChatGPT was available at that time, and I could have asked. A lot of them were basic questions about nonprofit law that Chat would be probably pretty good at answering. And I wouldn't have published it without verifying it separately of ChatGPT, but it would have been a better start than just starting from blank with an interview, I believe. Another way to use it is essentially as a needle in a haystack. This is what I find is kind of one of the most harmless cases. Say a source gives you a cryptic tip of, I heard that so-and-so person was in Amsterdam this weekend, ... and you don't know what they're talking about, or why they would have been in Amsterdam. You could search so and so in Amsterdam. What events are happening? Why would this specific source maybe be in Amsterdam? And it can maybe help you sort through that. Another example, this is kind of a joke, but an editor gives you a cryptic note and you need to decipher it as well, of saying, oh, at the background on that 1994 case. You can say, what is that 1994 case? Maybe saves you a bit of back and forth. But this is kind of a way of, if you have no idea how you would search something in Google, one way is to really type it all out in ChatGPT and see if there's a way to go from there. Here is another helpful tool that that I have used a bit here at Semaphore, where ChatGPT essentially allows you to create your own customized bot that is custom to your workflow. So in ChatGPT, in the top right corner where you have your account, I think you might have to have a Plus account. So hopefully you can get that expensed from your newsroom, but it's essentially under My GPTs is what they're called. And it basically then will take you to this page down here where it says, hi, I'll help you build a new GPT, say something like XYZ. So this allows you to essentially, if you find through maybe some of these other things I've shared before that are one way that AI has been very helpful, whether it's sifting through court opinions, or here's one example I put here is if you find that AI is good at identifying cliches in your writing or acting as a kind of first copy edit bot on copy, you can essentially tell this bot, every time I'm going to put in my story and I would like you to just identify every cliche that I include in my copy. And then it saves you from having to run that same prompt every time because it knows it will essentially make itself into an anti-cliche bot. And then no matter what, all you have to do is put it in, and you can also tell it, I am a journalist, I need, don't change anything else in the story. You can kind of communicate with it in a conversational way. And so one way that I used this is as essentially a custom search bot. We were just exploring possible ways to use AI here at Semaphore. And I kind of essentially made a GPT that ran specific searches for stories in other languages. Essentially, it's pretty good at translation as well. So we essentially would put a topic into this bot, and then it had a kind of very specific set of sources and types of news stories that it was looking for. And it allowed us to kind of create a custom search engine with this because it knew exactly what we were looking for every time. And it saved us having to write out a prompt that said, search for XYZ every time. And I will also provide links to these in a thing that I think Katya will send out later to kind of take you there itself. And it's pretty intuitive though, but this is kind of one way that you can customize it to your workflow. Another way is to kind of think of it as, this kind of goes off of the research assistant thing, but if there's based on everything I've kind of explained here, it's helpful to start thinking of ways and kind of shifting the mindset to, what is it that I really hate doing that maybe AI could automate or speed up, something like that. And if you don't know where to start, you can ask AI and say, how can I build XYZ to help me? And it's usually pretty good. Whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, I found that Claude is especially good with coding. This is something that it wrote for me. This is just one part of a much larger piece of code. You can see how many lines it is that I built that helped me install a system within my Google Docs, a Google Docs script, which I had no clue what that was. I'm not a coder. I didn't actually write any of it. I just kind of told it what I was looking for, and it walked me through the steps to do that. So there's a lot of ways that you can use this as a brainstorming tool for other AI tools, and it will walk you through how to implement that. And if you need it to be more dumbed down or less complex, it will help you with that as well. So that's another way. Here's my contact info if you want to reach out after, but I'm also open to questions now and would love to, if there's specific use cases that people have, to kind of talk through any ways that might be helpful, and also happy to talk offline as well if it goes over time. But yeah, that's my kind of general gist.
Thank you, JD. That was really insightful, and I'm definitely going to use the morning prompt, the everyday morning prompt. So thank you for sharing that.
And I guess I should add on that as you use these, you also see where the limitations are. So feel free to start one, and then you'll see, oh, it doesn't quite work XYZ. You can always update it afterwards. Keep tweaking it. That's definitely one big thing as well. So yeah.
Got it. Okay, well, we will open the floor up for questions. Does anyone have any questions? You can unmute yourself or wave your hand or type it in the chat. Okay, Stell.
Yeah, I had a question about writing code. I had not thought about that, but occasionally when I'm working in a website that I don't know enough CSS code, can I ask some AI thing to create code for me to do a certain task?
Absolutely. It's remarkably good at making code. Um, essentially in human terms, you can ask ChatGPT or Claude, which is through Anthropic, tell it exactly what you're looking for, what you're building on. I don't know kind of what system you're using, but you just tell it and exactly what you want. If you have existing code, you can also just easily send that to the AI and say, expand this to include XYZ or find issues in this code or anything like that. So I've never coded before until I guess I still never have coded, but I use it to write code. Yes.
So is that Claude or Claude?
Claude, I'll type it in the chat as well.
Okay, thanks.
I've used it with ChatGPT also. I've had questions in Excel where I wanted to make Excel do something and I had no idea. So I very
Oh,
simply asked, like, I'm trying to combine these two rows and blah, blah. And it actually taught me some stuff about Excel that I didn't know because it said, don't you have this thing installed? It didn't actually talk to me personally, but you know what I mean? It walked me through things that I needed to install in order to make certain things I was trying to do work. So I actually
okay.
learned a lot from it.
Okay, Sabria.
Okay, I did it. I'm learning the technology, which probably means I shouldn't be using AI. The My question, I guess, for either person is one thing I think about is like who owns the stuff, right? So one thing we don't do as journalism, or at least in our newsroom, is share unwritten or unpublished content with anyone externally. So especially in the way that you were using it, JD, to catch cliches and stuff like that, how do you know that your content is safe when you upload it to this place for them to catch stuff like that for you, that it's not using that later somewhere else where your unpublished work is kind of being mimicked or copied, like feeding the system with free stuff?
That's a good question. I think Karen's probably better to answer the larger, question of ownership. I think it's very important. I think it's a valid question, and I'm not sure that I have a way to completely, uh, say that it's perfect as it is. There's probably concerns with they will train your models or train their models on things that you put in. I know that ChatGPT does have now a temporary mode that you can click that apparently they don't train their models on that content. So I will often use that one. But Karen, yeah, I'm curious what Karen has to say about the
Yeah,
larger ownership issues. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's one of the big regulatory questions that are unsolved and copyright issues. And I remember when BuzzFeed News was having some issues, they were laying people off and people were saying, are you using my articles to train the machine? And the answer, of course, is yes, you know. And so your unique voice as a journalist is used. I think so, and that's why I said, my overriding question is what is it that we as journalists contribute as creative people that AI cannot? But what are we giving AI that they will then use to ultimately sort of replace some of the things that that are our journalistic identity? And this question that you asked, Sabria, is something that has always sort of baffled me when, as you remember at UGA, we have this ethics board, and when we do these interview studies, we have to we have to sort of tell them where we're going to keep the audio files. Sometimes there are studies where we promise confidentiality and anonymity, and we're all using Otter. And I'm like, we're all uploading this stuff to a server. I find that such an oversight and such a loophole. And I think it's sort of indicative of all of these loopholes around AI and exactly what you were addressing, which is why one of the tools that I sent as a link to Katya is a transcription app that you download and that transcribes on your computer. So you're not actually parking any of that information anywhere. And you can, with good conscience, tell your sources that this is between you and me, right? This is not going anywhere. So I think it's a great question and it's unresolved and a huge problem in my estimation.
What's the name of that application that you just mentioned?
It's called NoScribe. And if you just Google NoScribe, it'll take you to a GitHub site. And if you scroll down, you find the link to download it. It's slower than Otter. or any of the others, but it's really good and it does a ton of languages. So I do a lot in German. The German transcription is great, and I think it's actually a German developer. A lot of the Europeans that have different privacy laws, they're further ahead in developing some of these tools that address the issues of privacy. So, I definitely check around GitHub and see who's working on these tools that might serve you better. I mean, it depends on what kind of journalism you do in terms of confidentiality. But I even think that, my carefully crafted sentences should not just be out there and emulated by others. I mean, I'm kind of teasing, but I think it definitely is an important issue to think about.
For sure.
One thing real quick in between, because Karin, you mentioned, and JD, you mentioned specific tools. Just for all of you to know, Karin and JD have agreed to share links to their favorite AI tools. Some of them are being mentioned, they mentioned them in their presentations, are being mentioned now. We'll collect them, we'll put them together and publish them on our website in a couple of days. Just for you to know, I mean, take notes, but we will collect them all and they will be made available to you in the next couple of days.
Yes. Okay, next I saw Miss Tina. Your hand was raised for, do you have a question?
Hi, I was just thinking about this whole conversation from the perspective of a journalist for the last 30 years. And, we usually just go and get our original content. And now it's, everyone wants it faster and faster, and they're getting sources from other places. But, I went to US to Georgia and my MFA program, and our motto was, we don't make shit up. So sometimes I'm reading stuff all the time and I say, where did this come from? It's not a lot of attribution to the stories. And I'm wondering, how do we police that? I'm sorry, it's a big old question. I can't tell you.
I think it's valid, but I think it also shows you what is innately human and important about reporting and journalism. AI can't replace on the ground interviews, or replace the insight that you've gotten over your experience in journalism and knowing what is a story, what isn't, and just experimenting with the tools a little bit will really quickly show you what they can't do, to the point that it does make me feel a little bit better sometimes when you read an AI written piece, that maybe ChatGPT, you're experimenting with something on ChatGPT and you read what they write and it's like, dang, this would not be able, it might kind of look nice on the surface, but you actually read it and it's like I was saying, it's just kind of sometimes a lot of BS. But I think it's a valid concern, and that's how I approach it, I guess, as a journalist, is never fully trust everything that it tells you. Always, don't always try to find it on your own. And yeah, curious what Karin thinks kind of as the larger questions around reliability.
Well, policing, I think that was your question, right? Like how do news users police it? How can they? So it's a question of transparency. And I tried to find for this presentation an example, because the AP has been using this for a while. And when we think about branded content, there are regulations about actually labeling it. I could not find a single AP AI produced article that actually had the disclaimer on the side saying, assisted, produced with the assistance of, and then maybe even name the tool. So I think that is something that we need to demand. And I was actually going to ask JD, what policies do you have, or any of the people on this call, do your news organizations have stringent policies about the use of AI? How do you label it? What's the limit? Or are you all kind of left to your own devices?
I will say that Semaphore does have a policy of not publishing AI generated content. It's more so used as internal experimentation, possible productivity tools. But I think there's a pretty clear consensus, at least for us right now, that it's not something that we want to be published. I know that a lot of larger organizations, Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal, have both been publishing AI generated summaries at the top of their stories that have 3 bullet points that kind of or give an overview of the story. Apparently, they've already run into some issues with those at Bloomberg, at least, where they got some little things wrong. So I do think there's certainly some pitfalls with that.
Plus, there's spoilers, right? Why do I need to read the entire article if the summary is already telling me
Right.
what I need to
Or
read?
it's just kind of a rewriting of the top three paragraphs of the story. So I think
Yeah.
it's also a question of what's the real use here.
Yeah, and I mean, not to say that I distrust you at Semaphore, you and your colleagues, but like, are you all going to be honest about it? I have an AI policy for my journalism students, and I catch them all the time disregarding my policy is super liberal. I'm like, if you use it, tell me what you use because I want to learn what works, what doesn't work. And still, they try to sell me some of this reporting that they've done, leaving the chat GPT and the URL, they'll learn. Um, but but they all still try to sort of game the system because they're sort of stuck between this, like I need a good grade and I need to be a good journalist. So I think AI really also it's like this sugar-coated carrot right in front of us because when you're out of time, why not just see if AI can produce something good? So I don't know if journalists are honest, I'm sure, but I'm sure some of them will also try to pull a fast one on their editors.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
I have a question. Um, I'm curious to know. I mean, I think Karin, it was you who mentioned you saw a LinkedIn ad for an AI assisted reporter or something. Is that right? Did I have that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I'm curious if there might be sort of um, two pathways, if you will, where there'll be sort of AI assisted reporters and then maybe sort of traditional journalists as an interim kind of thing. I don't know. I'm wondering right now it seems like journalists are sort of learning on their own and trying things out. So yeah, I just kind of want to get your take on that.
I mean, I noticed it because I thought, oh, maybe this is a study I should do, like do interviews with AI assisted reporters and ask them how they feel about being journalists, and about their assistant, their AI assistant. And I sort of liken it to the emergence of data journalists. I mean, maybe some of you remember how it was like, oh, is a data journalist really a journalist, or is an audience engagement editor really a journalist? I think it is this new type of journalist that's emerging, and now we're calling them AI assisted. But I think it's up for grabs. It's sort of like what we make of it. And I agree with you that we're all sort of in this big laboratory, which is what really scares me, right? Because if you look at the Post and the New York Times and, the really well-funded news orgs, they can have somebody come in and help the journalist develop the tools and develop fluency in AI. But if you're working for, the Northeast Georgian, good luck. Sorry, I'm not more positive about this.
No, I appreciate that. It's kind of my sense.
Yeah.
I would also, as a kind of a possible counterpoint, though, I would possibly argue that some of the smaller places might be able to be more nimble and adapt. Obviously, small newspapers are probably resources are very strained, so they might not have as much time. But I know, like for Semaphore, we're less than 3 years old and pretty small, and that gives us the flexibility to experiment with some of these things and not go through the bureaucracy that the New York Times, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal would have to go through. And it kind of makes me think of they have all those resources. It probably goes through all of these checks, and and you kind of end up with these possibly bland tools of summarizing the top three paragraphs of a story. And at the end of the day, I don't know if that's kind of uh, really a positive use of those resources. So I think there's also a space for um, uh, folks at smaller places to be able to maybe experiment a little bit more and be more nimble and really push the boundaries on things that maybe at larger organizations they might be more afraid to do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that for smaller organizations, actually, these tools could be a godsend, right? They could really, but the interviews that I've done for a different story with just local journalists and that are, the only paper in a county, these are two people, like somebody who's like pushing 60 and then somebody fresh out of journalism school. I had an interview scheduled with one of them today. He had to cancel because the driver that takes the papers out was sick, so he had to deliver the papers. I think that's the kind of those are the papers that really need someone to come in and
Yeah,
help them figure out how to use these tools to make some of these processes work
absolutely.
faster. And they're the ones who just don't have the time to. And I've asked them about AI, and they roll their eyes, and they ask me, "Can you send me some links?" Because they don't have the time to do it. So I mean, I think that would be an awesome project also for SPJ or others, to go out and see, can we do like some kind of workshop for some of these under-resourced papers and help them figure out how to use these tools to their
Yeah.
benefit.
That's a great idea. And sort of piggybacking off of jobs, what sort of jobs do you think are at risk of being basically gone away with AI? Do you think it could be editors, producers, reporters?
JD, how secure do you
I'll leave that one up to you. Okay.
I was thinking about that question, and coming from television, right now, local TV stations they're looking for producers because these are the people that make the phone calls, that have sort of the people skills that can make stuff happen. And I think all those jobs that really still rely on these soft skills, right? Being able to pick up the phone, call people, connect with people, do these interviews like you were mentioning, JD, like these, that's why I asked this sort of broad question over and over again. What is it that we as journalists know how to do that the machine will not be able to learn and not be able to do? And I think that's the thing. I mean, in local TV stations, they already have the TV studios I've looked at, they already have these automated cameras. The camera operators are pretty much gone, right? There are, photographers that photographers I think are not going to be replaced, that actually take the picture. But I think anybody who has to use these people skills is pretty safe, and I think that's what we should be teaching our students to be good at.
I have a follow up on that because you mentioned JD, sort of the human part of journalism, and Karin just elaborated on that a little bit. I'm wondering, the good old fashioned field reporter, right, who is going out, doing the interviews, feeling the atmosphere and doing all that. How it's probably safer, as you said, Karin, but how can they benefit very practically in their job as field reporter from AI tools?
I guess as former city hall reporter that involved a lot of going around Atlanta's neighborhoods and talking to people, I think there's a lot of technical work that's involved with going through documents, city hall, city council agendas. There's a lot of that kind of work of maybe sifting through large parts of data, or especially for general assignment reporters, if you're coming onto a topic, writing about something that you haven't written about before, just to get a kind of baseline knowledge of something, like I mentioned with the nonprofit story. So I do think there's still a lot to make you a better field reporter that is there. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been on shoots where people really didn't want to give me stuff, so they would hand me these like crazy CDs with unusable documents, right? But if I had a tool to easily convert some of these PDFs into, which I know AI can do really easily now, that kind of stuff I think really helps you when you're out there and you sometimes get some documents that are maybe purposely not quite as usable
Mm,
as it could be. And I think just these transcription tools are great, turning what you're bringing in from the field into something that you will then use in the next step of your production
mhm.
process, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. I also think about things like FOIA requests. If you're FOIAing every, uh, police department in Georgia, for example, AI could give you a list of every police department and customize a FOIA request for every single one if you asked it, or if you made a FOIA bot, like I was describing, where you make a custom bot that allows you to, you type what you want, and it'll automatically generate that template for you, and tell you maybe where to mail it to, or find you a link that then shows you where to mail it to. But you still have to know, as a human, as a good human reporter, what you're FOIAing, what you're looking for. Those are things that, like we were talking about, those human skills that AI would have a really hard time replacing, knowing really like what to look for example.
So I do have another question. Many journalists, especially freelancers, also work in content creation. Are the guidelines of using AI there looser, stricter, or the same? And are there any specific tips on how freelance journalists working in the content creation field might benefit?
Well, I think I sort of talked about that a little bit when I compared it with branded content. I think there are, if you're talking about sort of content creation in terms of marketing and PR, is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
I was thinking more like news influencers. There's a lot of news influencers on TikTok and Instagram.
I think it's unregulated right now. So I think right now that's kind of the area in right now that there's not enough regulation. And news influencers or branded content folks, they're often not aware of any regulations or any of the issues around the work that they're doing. And I think we definitely need that, right? I want to know and right now, I don't know about how you guys feel, but so often I'm seeing things now on social media and I'm like, man, is that real? Is that like a real voice? Is that really? I'm so skeptical about everything that I see right now. And I know Moses has done some work about deep fakes, right? I think he's watched a lot of deep fake stuff where people are just trying to sell you something and it's 100% fake. And I think right now they're trying to tell us that, oh, you can tell the hand looks kind of funny. But I think it's just a matter of time before all those kinks kind of get ironed out. So I think it's unregulated. I think it's problematic. And I think it's also created this new level of mistrust and opening for more like fake news narratives out there. And I'm really concerned about that.
Yeah, I agree. I do think for human creators, I wouldn't say the rules are necessarily looser. I think the same kind of standards and caveats should apply. I do think there might be a little bit more room to use different tools and be more creative when it comes to content creation. I know there's some video editing tools, for example, that will automatically maybe uh, cut dead air in a video or something like that. There's a lot of these AI video editing tools that are coming out, some probably more ethically dubious than others, um, that folks can probably use. I think some are totally valid and harmless, and some are probably worse. But I do think, as kind of a theme that we're hitting on here, is that what Karin was saying also provides an opening for human creators and folks who aren't relying only on AI to make their videos to maybe have an inroad if people get tired of this AI slop. And yeah, I think that that's something that is worth kind of. Oh yeah, I forgot one more. One thing that I've tried or experimented with is kind of putting AI. OpenAI now has a video generator where you can type in what you want, and it will make a video for you. And I've experimented with like putting a paragraph of something I wrote into it, and kind of saying make a TikTok style video with this text and create visuals for it to kind of see. And it was terrible. Like the text was wrong, all the visuals were all over the place. It got a bunch of country flags wrong. So it's still a while, pretty far away from replacing like high quality journalistic video. So that made me feel a little better, perhaps.
I asked it once to
But
turn
yeah.
something into a graphic novel style thing because it was like a sensitive topic. It was about, sex trafficking, and it refused. It was like, this is against our policies because I guess I used the word sex in it.
Yeah.
So suddenly it was like it refused to do it. But then I modified it because I think sometimes for sensitive topics, you can do like a graphic novel style, and that worked really well,
Mm,
actually.
mm.
So, yeah, it's all over but the crying, guys. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Well, I will check again to see if anybody wants to share. Okay, we do have a question in here. Lars says, a journalism educator told me once that in a world where the nature of reality is so difficult to discern, being in the truth business becomes a good business to be in. So I think that raises a good point. The journalistic method and standards become the competitive advantage. What do you all think about that?
I agree, and it made me think about something that I also thought about during Karen's presentation when you mentioned the kind of presentation of stories and how Google search is kind of uh, aggregating journalistic work and kind of putting it there. Apparently, Semaphore wrote a story about this a week ago or so. Apparently, PR professionals have noticed that getting their brand and getting their clients into journalistic uh, newspapers and that sort of thing is really helps boost their boost their standing in search kind of aggregation and in chatbots better than writing a blog post on their own website. So that's kind of a funny little way that it has kind of given journalism a competitive advantage when it comes to these things, because now the chatbots apparently know that we're the more reliable ones. That's just kind of a silly little silver lining there. But no, I definitely agree with the overall sentiment, Lars.
Does anyone else have any questions or want to share any experiences about using AI in the newsroom or in other journalism duties?
We just found a really fun, interesting way to use it. And I don't know how to change my name on my iPad, but my name is Sabria Rice, and I'm with KFF Health News. Used to work with Karin at UGA. And my newsroom covers healthcare. And we had a quote that we received from the Trump administration that we were putting into a story, and realized they had given us that same quote, given different reporters that same quote, instead of hopping on the phone and answering questions, just giving that same canned quote to various different people. And we decided, oh, we'd be curious to see how many other places they've given this exact quote to. And it was hundreds of other publications on like a similar topic. So I think our newsroom policy on AI is very new, but and I hope I don't miscontextualize it. I think our policy right now is that you can use it for research for something like this. Like, we decided not to use the quote ever again, for example, and to go back and keep asking more questions. That quote and others will kind of look at anything that comes from the administration at this point and put it in and see if it's been used elsewhere. But for research purposes like that, but not for any kind of editorial, like any kind of writing or headlines or like that sort of thing. That's how we're navigating it at the moment. Research, not editorial.
Yep, I agree with that approach.
So you won't even use an app that will help you figure out a good headline or good terms to use to improve your SEO?
I don't know. My team doesn't. Most of us tend to avoid it for anything that's written. But I don't know about our social team, which uses them for social media platforms, for example. I don't know what their approach is. In terms of writing the actual copy, it's one thing. What gets posted, maybe it's a different approach.
I do find that for things like SEO, it can be better, because SEO headlines can sometimes be a little bit more formulaic and aren't really fun to write anyway. And so, but for sometimes on the more creative headlines, it's not as good at that. And Semaphore also will sometimes do these silly little puns that we'll put with our images. It's terrible at writing those. Those are ones that just come from like human wit. So like there's certain things that are more rote tasks that it's good at. But anything requiring like a little more creativity or knowledge about like your journalism style, for example, it's not as good.
Thank you for sharing.
I got one question. I got one quick question, and I know we need to wrap up here soon, but I'm also wondering if we all assume there is a generational divide, and there probably is. That sort of the digital natives, the student journalists, the earlier career journalists are embracing AI and using it it's just more natural to them. The veteran journalists or older journalists tend to be more skeptical. Is that really, just in your experience, is that really true? Or maybe the veteran journalists who grew up in sort of still the analog world maybe bring something to the table in terms of using AI that may be useful for the younger journalists? I don't know. I'm just wondering if there's anything obviously just anecdotal that you could share.
I don't think that's the case personally. I mean, our executive editor, who I work very closely with on developing these AI tools, Gina Chua, is a very experienced journalist, has decades of experience. And arguably she knows more than me when it comes to kind of how to think about these tools. And I think that's where a lot of the wisdom and the knowledge comes from, is kind of understanding where does this actually fit in? What does this mean? Versus I come from it with a little bit more of, ooh, look, I can do this cool thing, and she will kind of help me rein it in or direct it in the right way. So I don't think that's necessarily should be the case.
I agree. I think Gina Chua actually is the first submission on that Columbia Journalism
Yep.
review
Mhm.
thing. Yeah, I completely disagree that it's a generational thing, that the older folks are sort of shy about AI. On the contrary, I think they're actually they don't want to lose their jobs, right? So they're looking at ways to try and keep up with the modern technology. They also know what the real tasks of journalism are, sort of the norms and standards, what Lars was referring to in that quote. So I think they're really good at drawing the line. I, as an educator, kind of worry because I see that my students so take it for granted and are not getting the training that they need in order to use it responsibly. They are using it like, oh, it's just like Google searching. They don't understand sort of the power behind it and the power behind actually being a human being and calling people up. I mean, you should see my cold call days, when I make people make phone calls in the classroom, it's like people are having nervous breakdowns. But so it's like something that we really need to be mindful of as we bring young people into the profession, that they don't think that they can replace everything with AI without even being, as knowledgeable about what the tool means to the profession. But I think a lot of them, like digital natives, I think is such a crazy term, because just because I use the television doesn't mean I know how to work it, right? Like I couldn't build a television. So I think we really need to distinguish between that with digital natives. I don't think they really know what they've got in their hands, the power that they have in their hands. And I think older journalists are much better at figuring that out and using it. End of sermon.
I really appreciate hearing that. It has made me understand a little bit more what you meant about people's skills that are so valuable, that need to be learned and that cannot be replaced with this new technology.
All right. Well, I will, I'm not very good at multitasking, so I apologize for that. But so I have a final question. AI and journalism in 5 years. So that'll be 2030. What are your wishes and what are your concerns about using AI in journalism?
I guess my wish, this may be wishful thinking that it kind of proves the value of the reputable, human journalism that we talked about a little bit. And I guess I guess that kind of would be it. My concerns are many that we've kind of talked about here in terms of the slop taking over, and all of that, and the misinformation. But I do think that a lot of the large news organizations will kind of have a reckoning of kind of what was this all for, and kind of I think they'll quickly realize the limits of what they can do with all this money they're pouring into it. Like I mentioned, kind of the AI summaries that took probably tons of resources from these large organizations. So I do think that there's going to be maybe a possible a rethinking there as maybe some of the hype from the public dies down a bit. I'm curious what Karin thinks on that, though.
I'm curious what Tina thinks about it, who just raised her hand.
I thought it should be a standard that we're always fact checking. And we fact check on everything else. Let's fact check AI.
Yeah.
I think that should be a standard. So someone will think, oh, it's easier. I'll go to this source, and from AI, and forget that you have to check. I just think that should be a standard that should be universal.
Yeah. Another hope is that it gets more accurate as these models evolve as well, that they hallucinate less and make up fewer facts. That would certainly help the larger issue here.
Sabria, you raised your hand, Sabria. Can you tell I don't want to answer the question?
I was just actually applauding Tina's answer.
What are your predictions, Karin?
Well, my
And
hope is actually that they get worse at it, so that we know the difference between humans and
That's
machines
a
a
good
little
point. Yeah.
more. And I my hope is also that we finally look at how many resources this takes, right? We are sucking the earth dry with these kind of data centers, and that's ridiculous because we have brains that can also do some of this work. And my other hope is, and I mean, it's a hope. I can't really predict what's going to happen because there's so much that's happening right now that we can't predict. I mean, we're back at fake news, accusations when somebody asks a tough question. So that's a whole nother issue, right? Maybe bots asking questions will be more acceptable, right? Will be less politically controversial because the machine asked the question. But my hope is that we draw a clear line, that we really see, all right, this is AI assisted and this is not, and that we sort of understand the value of the one thing and stop kind of mixing them up. That maybe there is a more clear divide between this, automated news and this is human produced news. That is something that I would hope that we learn how to delineate it, because like you mentioned, there is an incredible hype going on right now that needs to calm down, and for us to like settle the dust and see what can we use, what can we not use, and how do we label things and just make it clear to people what the benefits are, and where we can use it, and label it better. That's my hope.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely think we're also going to see some heavily AI assisted investigations and projects win Pulitzers. Like there's going to be some incredible journalism that comes from some of these research tools,
Yeah.
where people can make models or all of a sudden be able to analyze large sets of data that they maybe weren't able to before. That'll lead to some incredible journalism. So
Yeah.
I hope that as well. That is clearly labeled, and all of those caveats as well.
Agreed. And going back to what you mentioned with the environmental issues, I was chatting with someone about that. And I mentioned how it takes so much water just to get one prompt, one reply back from ChatGPT, because that's the tool that I use the most. And the person said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, it takes water to like cool the computers that are generating the responses." And they didn't know that. So,
Yeah, and I think the head of OpenAI said, we're all using these models and we're being so polite, right? We're told that our prompt should be like, please find so and so. And that every time somebody responds with a thank you, it takes so much computing power that he's like, I wish people would stop being so polite. So I think that's very amusing, but I think it's something we should also, write about and do stories about so people understand sort of how the sausage is made.
Yeah. MIT Tech Review had a great piece that came out this week, a big project about the energy usage of AI, and how kind of a lot of it we don't even know because the models don't disclose.
Right.
They're closed source. They don't disclose how much energy they're taking up and how much each one, each search or each thank you to ChatGPT impacts their data centers. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it's almost like I feel like we have the next webinar or the next Zoom session coming up on this specific aspect. And thank you, Karin. Thank you, JD, for presentations, ideas, inspiration, time. Really what I think one of the key lines is, or what we're taking away from this is really be obviously skeptical, ask questions, what we as journalists should do, but also JD said, don't be afraid, don't have fear, kind of embrace it with all the skepticism that's there. So thank you so much for, great insight. Thank you, Janelle, for moderating this event. And thank you to all of you for asking great questions. I think this conversation could go on. And as I mentioned, Karin and JD will provide some links to their favorite or best practice or whatever AI tools that we're going to put on the website shortly. So please check back in a couple of days, probably early next week. It's going to be there. So that concludes the program, our program for tonight. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about SPJ Georgia, or you are interested in joining our organization, please check us out at spj.com or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, hopefully soon LinkedIn as well. We're working on this. Or just shoot us an email at spjgeorgia@gmail.com. And with that, I hope you all have a great, safe rest of your evening. Thank you all for joining us. And we hope to see you all for one of our next events, in person or online. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Katya.
Katya and Janelle.
Have a
Nice
good
to
one.
meet you, JD.
Nice to meet you too. And if anyone has any ideas they want to bat around with AI, or want specific feedback or thoughts, feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Same.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Great evening.
Cheers.